talking about um, the things that we remember when we were younger in the neighborhood. There were corner stores, there were bakeries, there were all kinds of different things that were really accessible to us. These days, now they have the big supermarkets and everything, but we just wanted to reminisce about them because they were such unique
in your corner store.
Well, I remember I'm originally from Rockford, Illinois, and I lived in the South Rockford, which was pretty much an Italian neighborhood.
Oh.
And neighborhoods were so neat. Everybody knew you.
Yeah.
You knew everybody by their first name, or you called them Mr. So-and-so or Mrs.
Mr.
somebody.
and Mrs. Everybody was called at that time Mr. and Mrs., right? We were told to do that.
We had this little grocery store about a block and a half from us. It was called the Morgan Street Grocery. Pete and Al were the owners. But it was such a neat little place. It was an old storefront. I don't know what was in there before, but it had wood floors. You walked in, and the old screen door would when you opened it and slammed
the little bell.
The little bell, the little bell
we
would ring, and the guys would know there's somebody's there.
Because they would be in the back cutting. They had there was also a meat counter, and so behind their meat counter, because they weren't big stores, and I assume that yours was probably similar to ours.
Yeah, and it was, just a small place. I'm sure they didn't have everything that you could possibly want, but it was enough, to keep you going in your household. My mother used to send me, and she'd say, well, go to the grocery store and get this. And she said, tell Pete or Al to put it on the book.
Yes.
And you know what that meant? That meant that she was going to charge it. There was no charge cards.
Or they pay at the end of the week when they
got
their paycheck.
It was no charge cards, but she said to tell them to put it on the book. So as a little kid, I knew that. I really didn't understand what put it on the book, but he always got this book out and he wrote something down.
Right.
So and that was it. That was the charging, and everybody did that. That was how it worked.
It was that way for me too. We had our corner store was called Budzine's, and I can remember my mother sending me up there with a note. I was probably 4 or 5 years old. That's how I got my nickname Droopy Drawers, because I don't know, my sisters or something must have saw me going up the street in my pants. I was a skinny child apparently, and they were starting falling off. So they still tease me about being droopy drawers today. But anyhow, so can you imagine any mother nowadays? They'd probably be put in jail if they let their kid go 2 blocks up the road. But that is how it was, and I guess we were smart and responsible, right?
Right. So, I know I was. I remember, and it wasn't that far. You didn't have to cross a whole bunch of streets or anything.
I had 2 streets I had to cross. 2 streets.
2 busy streets?
Well, they weren't that busy.
Yeah, right. It was in your neighborhood.
Yeah.
The one thing about these corner, especially a grocery store, they knew you. They knew who your mom and dad was.
Yes.
They knew who your grandparents were because in that neighborhood, the grandparents lived nearby. My grandmother and 2 grandmothers lived about a block from me. And, I'd go over there all the time, and they'd say, well, now, Angie, you have to go to the store for me. I need this. My Italian grandmother, she would need pasta or a spaghetti or something. And she always had a little sample that I could carry it to the grocery store and tell Peter L, I got to have this macaroni. Yeah.
It's kind of sad when I look back, because I'm still living in the same town I grew up in, actually. There was a time I was gone, but we were, the one place was, of course, there's all different places, now there, we used to have a bakery. And I remember going into the bakery. I think it was called
It smelled good.
Oh, my mother, and she, bless her, and maybe not, because that's where I got my love of the fresh bread. Oh, who doesn't love fresh bread?
Yeah, there was it was in our neighborhood too. I think that years ago, especially like the 40s and the 50s, I'm kind of remembering, um, that they were quite prevalent. I mean, they were locally
They were all,
owned. They, somebody that,
somebody.
some family that always lived in your
Mhm.
neighborhood opened this store, and you go to that store.
That's
And
right.
it was fun because I remember. Every once in a while, my grandma, if I was going to the store for her, she'd give me a penny or a nickel or something,
Oh yes.
and I could get
spend
myself
it.
a treat, and
Yeah.
I could get a candy bar
Remember
for a nickel.
But
You know,
do you
was-
remember the candy jars they used to
Yeah,
have there? We had
and I
candy
mean,
jars.
it was kind of an adventure. You're seeing all this stuff. They had this big cooler with great big chunks of ice in it, and they had like
Is that what that's soda?
yeah,
Oh.
for Coca-Cola and RC
Oh,
and orange drink and
Orange
all
drink.
those things. And so
Orange
you
Crush.
saw new
Orange
new
Crush.
things every time you went into
Yeah,
the store,
right. Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember one of the family, well, a couple of things. I worked at the local pharmacy, which was really, it was
That's like
right
a
on the
corner store too,
corner
yeah.
store.
Yeah.
And it was Rhodey Pharmacy, and I loved working there. I worked there through high school. I got my job when I was 16 and worked there. And we made ice cream sundaes.
Right.
We had you did that too.
I did it too, yes.
So it's kind of funny.
It happened to be a corner
Yeah.
drugstore.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know why, but they're always
Did
on the
you
corner.
make sundaes there too? Because we had sundaes and hot fudge. We had the real hot fudge. We actually scooped it out. It was kept warm.
Oh, yeah.
And then we had
You had
nuts.
a regular soda fountain, like
a regular soda. You could
stools
pull up there and sit at the stool. And then we had a place where they had roasted nuts. So the nuts were warm. I do remember one day one of the congressmen came into the pharmacy. It was a kind of a well-known pharmacy. And people, I think, liked my boss, Mr. Rhodey. And he brought his nuts. He left his nuts on the counter. And so I ran out after him. He's already half a block down the road, and I'm going, "You're nuts, sir! You're nuts, sir!" I can't imagine what people might have thought, but I'm not sure if he ever turned around. I don't remember that.
Well, I remember at the drugstore too. I'd always work on the weekends, and on Sunday morning, there was always a bunch of guys that would come in and ask for an Alka-Seltzer. Sort of
Yeah,
cold or
sure,
something.
sure.
But anyway,
Plop,
I didn't
plop,
even know what
fizz,
they
fizz.
were. I said, well, what are they?
Yeah.
Luckily, I had, a friend was working with me, and he knew that he had been there longer than me, so he knew how to make the Alka-Seltzer.
Well,
I tell you. But I mean, it was just kind of, just a casual, friendly atmosphere. And so the neighborhood became, a very important unit.
yes.
It was not only your mother and father who instilled things in you, it was the people that you saw every day, just the way they acted towards you. I mean, they were very accommodating for little kids.
They were. They were very, but little kids had more responsibility in those years too.
That is true.
So.
But I can remember going to the store and having 2 pennies to get something.
Right.
And they would tell me something that I could get for a penny.
Sure.
And it was.
They were.
It was just a kind of a sweet time atmosphere.
It was, and you did know everybody that would come in when you were working in those kind of places. What'd you start at an hour?
Oh gosh, it was probably less than 50 cents. Probably 50 cents.
Probably.
I don't know.
I think.
I mean, that was like that's when I was about like 16 too.
Yeah,
so.
and I'm I'm 4 years younger, so. Mine is, I think I started at 75.
Oh,
but
you were making money.
By the time I left, I think I was making I want to say I was making $1.10. But I was there a couple of years, and so it took a while. But I guess he was pretty fair.
But when we look back at our old neighborhoods, and that's what they were, they were a very compact little place, like people, families and older people, kind of a combination of that. And it was neat. I mean, I never felt weird about walking to the store myself
No.
because everybody down the street, I knew everybody in those houses.
Yeah, so you felt safe. You could run in if you had to.
Yeah,
I mean,
not personally where we visited them or anything.
But you knew
But we
them.
all knew who was where and what.
Yeah.
And so it was, it was just kind of a good feeling. Now, I mean, nowadays you worry about your kids going out in a neighborhood,
Yeah, and I mean, I know a lot of people grew up in the country and they didn't have the same experience as we did. We both grew up in small towns.
Pretty.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it got bigger. It's bigger now.
The neighborhood was small.
And the neighborhoods were small.
Yeah.
The neighborhoods seemed small. You had your school that you went to and all the kids that went to that school, and I can remember walking down the street and the smell. I think it still has that same smell. It brings me, when I'm out sometimes in the spring and I'm driving through town, I get real melancholy kind of, because I go, that reminds me of the street I grew up on.
Yeah, right.
And it's kind of a neat, still a homey feeling now.
I mean, there were all kinds of different stores in the neighborhood. In my little Italian grocery store, one of the owners lived in a house that was attached to the store, and so my mother ran out of something, or she needed milk, or something that was dire. She'd send me home, and she just said, "Knock on the door," and of course, any guy is going to say, "Oh, that little." I can't say no to this little girl, And I can remember going there so many times, and he'd say, "Well, just wait a minute here on the porch," and he went and get whatever I want, and so it wasn't frivolous. It wasn't a frivolous shopping thing. It was the necessity that you needed. Yeah. In the neighborhood that we lived to, there was a restaurant, an Italian restaurant, so you can get a nice pizza.
We didn't have that.
It had carry out and stuff. Yeah. But I mean, it seemed like the services were there. That you could go from one to the other, and it was really kind of neat because on the corners there were. Within a block, maybe there was another grocery store or another bakery or whatever.
And then
and get acquainted with a clerk or something.
The same clerk.
Yeah, because it was so personable.
Yeah.
They would ask you little questions. Well, what are you doing today? And as I got older, well, how's school and everything like that. So it was like another presence than your own family and next door neighbors. I mean, it was somebody who knew you and wanted to know you and help you in some way. So,
and I think
it's really customer service. That's what it was.
That you folks out there, this causes you to start remembering your old corner store too, and thank you.
It's fun
for coming.
And the thing is, it brings back such wonderful memories of how you felt as a youngster. And so we appreciate your watching today, and tune us in next time. Don't forget to subscribe. We want to hear from you. And always remember, it's between you and me.